This story is a work of dark historical fiction inspired by events and folklore from 19th century Virginia. It contains disturbing themes, including extreme child abuse, confinement, psychological trauma, and human cruelty. The story is intended for mature audiences only and does not condone or glorify violence. Reader discretion is strongly advised. Beneath the polished floors and lavish parlors of the Sullivan estate lay a place that few dared to speak of: the basement. To visitors and townsfolk, the mansion appeared grand, orderly, and safe. Yet below the surface existed a reality so horrific it defied comprehension. It was here that Jonathan and Margaret Sullivan confined their children, hiding them from the world in a chamber of darkness and iron. The basement entrance was cleverly concealed. A trapdoor hidden under a rug in the kitchen, reinforced with a heavy lock, prevented even the most curious of visitors from discovering the truth. The door was thick, the wood blackened with age, and the hinges oiled to prevent squeaks. Servants who worked in the kitchen dared not lift it. Some claimed to hear faint cries and muffled screams seeping through the cracks, but fear kept them silent. Any who questioned the patriarch's intentions risked swift and severe punishment. Once inside, the basement was a labyrinth of shadows. Rough stone walls trapped the dim light from a single flickering lantern. The air was thick with dampness, and the metallic tang of rust mingled with a faint, sickly sweetness that seemed impossible to identify. Chains lined the walls, secured into stone and heavy with the weight of their grim purpose. Each chain was attached to a collar, each collar worn by a child. There were 47 in total. 47 children of varying ages, all bound in silence. The eldest, a boy of 14, had learned the unspoken rules of survival quickly. His shoulders were stiff from the chains, his hands calloused from gripping cold iron. He had seen siblings fall into despair, succumbing to hunger, sickness, or sheer hopelessness. He learned early that defiance invited punishment. Those who tried to escape were brought back, their spirits broken, their cries echoing in the basement until even the strongest stopped hoping for rescue. The youngest children, some barely toddlers, lay in corners with chains short enough to prevent movement beyond a few feet. Their eyes were wide, reflecting the flicker of the lantern like tiny mirrors of terror. They huddled together, seeking comfort from one another, though the comfort was fleeting. Hunger gnawed constantly at their bellies, and thirst often left their lips cracked and bleeding. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by nightmares of the iron walls closing in, of shadows looming, and of the parents who ruled both above and below with iron precision. Jonathan Sullivan was the enforcer. He paced the basement floor with a whip in hand, his face contorted with anger at the slightest infraction. Margaret, though quieter, instilled fear in subtler ways. Her gaze alone could silence the loudest child. She supervised the children's meager meals, ensuring that each received only what she deemed necessary for survival. No more, no less. Any attempt to hoard food or comfort one another was met with swift reprimand. Light rarely entered the basement, save for the single lantern. Seasons passed unseen. Days blurred into nights, and the children marked time only by the rhythm of the family's footsteps above. The basement became a world unto itself, a prison without hope, without freedom, and without end. The children's laughter, innocence, and curiosity, those small joys of childhood, had been extinguished, replaced by quiet compliance and the constant awareness of chains biting into flesh. Despite the cruelty, the children sought solace in each other. The eldest whispered stories to the younger ones, tales of forests, rivers, and birds, the things they had never seen, only imagined. They sang softly to drown out the groaning of chains and the creaking of the stone walls. At night, when the house above fell silent, they spoke in hushed voices of escape, though none dared attempt it. They knew that the Sullivans' vigilance was absolute, that a single misstep could mean a return to punishment far worse than chains. Prolonged isolation, deprivation, or even physical abuse. The basement was not just a prison of iron and stone. It was a psychological labyrinth designed to break spirit and hope. The children's senses were dulled. They learned to fear sound, to mistrust movement, and to obey without question. Any sudden noise, an unexpected footstep above, a cough, or the drop of a dish, could send them into trembling panic, fearing that punishment would follow. Their world had no sunlight, no warmth, no laughter, only the whispers and moans of those around them and the occasional voice of the masters above. Over time, the basement itself seemed to absorb the sorrow. Its walls, damp and cold, held echoes of decades of despair. The chains, worn and rusted, carried the weight of not just bodies, but broken minds. And yet, life persisted. Children adapted. They learned to survive in darkness, to find small joys in whispered stories, in a shared piece of bread, or in the brief touch of another child's hand. Even in the most harrowing conditions, they clung to fragments of hope, small though they were, that one day freedom might come. The Sullivans' neighbors remained largely unaware. From the outside, the family continued their life of apparent normalcy. Laughter and music drifted from the upper floors during gatherings and church functions. Outsiders were shown polished floors, neat rooms, and attentive children, though only those few deemed fit to appear in public. The majority of the children remained hidden below, invisible to the world, forgotten in the basement that served as both home and tomb. Yet the basement, for all its terror, also became a place of unity among the children. They formed a fragile society within their chains, assigning small tasks, comforting the youngest, and maintaining rituals to preserve memory and identity. These acts of defiance, though subtle, were their small victories against a life built entirely on oppression. It was here, in the hidden basement, that the children's resilience shone, even as the walls closed in tighter and the chains bit deeper. The Sullivan estate, with all its grandeur and respectability above, was built upon this dark secret. The basement was its heart, a place of unimaginable suffering, yet also the birthplace of courage, imagination, and the faint glimmer of hope that would one day bring the truth to light. Life in the Sullivan basement was a daily struggle for survival. The 47 children, ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers, were bound in iron collars and chains that restricted their movement. Their world was confined, dark, and suffocating, with only the faint flicker of lantern light to mark the passage of time. Days blurred into nights, and the concept of sunlight, seasons, or freedom became almost mythical, known only through stories whispered by the older children. The eldest among them, Thomas, was 14, with eyes darkened by sleepless nights and shoulders hardened by the weight of the chains. He had learned quickly that resistance brought pain. Yet even in this oppressive environment, he assumed the role of protector. He guided the younger children, shared scraps of food, and whispered stories to distract them from the harsh reality of their confinement. Without him, the youngest ones would have succumbed to fear entirely. Food was scarce and barely nourishing. The Sullivans rationed every morsel, ensuring that the children received just enough to keep them alive. Bread was hard and dry, occasionally supplemented with a bowl of watery soup, while clean water was scarce and often contaminated. Illness spread rapidly in the basement, yet medical care was almost non-existent. When a child fell seriously ill, Jonathan or Margaret might ignore their suffering, leaving them to fight for survival alone. Those who became too weak or sickly were sometimes punished further, for the family considered weakness a form of defiance. Sleep offered little comfort. The chains prevented children from lying down comfortably, and the floor was hard stone, cold and damp. Nights were punctuated by muffled cries, whispered prayers, and occasional whimpers of pain. The eldest children did their best to comfort the youngest, holding them close, whispering calming stories of fields and birds they had never seen. For a fleeting moment, these stories offered escape, allowing the children to imagine a world beyond the iron bars. Physical abuse was frequent. Jonathan Sullivan ruled with a whip and a cold, unyielding glare. Any perceived misstep, crying too loudly, touching another child without permission, or attempting to communicate secretly, was met with swift punishment. Margaret, while less overtly violent, enforced psychological torment. She would manipulate children with threats, isolation, or favoritism, turning them against one another to maintain control. The combination of physical and psychological abuse created a pervasive atmosphere of fear, making every movement and word a matter of life or death. Despite this horror, small acts of kindness persisted among the children. Thomas organized games that could be played without movement, such as whispering riddles or telling stories. Older children would comfort the younger ones, and sometimes, a sibling would share a morsel of food or a scrap of cloth to provide warmth. These tiny gestures became lifelines, moments of humanity in an otherwise cruel and unrelenting environment. Education, such as it existed, was minimal and strictly controlled. The Sullivans forbade learning that might empower the children to question their circumstances. Instead, any instruction focused on obedience and maintaining silence. The children memorized rules, chores, and their assigned roles in the basement. Some older children attempted to teach the younger ones to read or write in secret, hiding scraps of paper and charred candle stubs. These lessons were acts of rebellion, dangerous but necessary to preserve a sense of self in a world designed to strip them of identity. The emotional toll was profound. Loneliness, despair, and fear were constant companions. Many children suffered from nightmares, panic attacks, and a pervasive sense of hopelessness. Yet, the basement also became a crucible of resilience. The children learned to adapt, to find small comforts, and to maintain hope in secret. They created rituals, silent prayers, whispered songs, and imaginary journeys to keep their minds alive. Each day survived was a victory, each shared smile a fleeting triumph over the cruelty surrounding them. Communication was a delicate, perilous affair. Children learned to whisper, tap messages in Morse-like sequences on the walls, or use subtle gestures to convey warnings or comfort. These secret networks strengthened their bonds, enabling them to cooperate when possible, share vital information about food or threats, and offer emotional support. Even amidst chains, fear, and darkness, the children developed a community, a fragile society that ensured some measure of survival. Yet, the most terrifying aspect of their plight was the uncertainty. They never knew when a new punishment would arrive, when a sibling might fall ill and be ignored, or when Jonathan and Margaret would decide that a child's existence was inconvenient. This perpetual state of dread forced them into silence, compliance, and a constant vigilance that drained their spirit. Even the bravest among them, Thomas included, often felt powerless against the weight of authority and cruelty. The basement, with its iron chains, stone walls, and choking darkness, became both a prison and a proving ground. The children's bodies and minds bore scars, some visible, others invisible. Yet, the strength they cultivated in this crucible of suffering was remarkable. Their resilience, courage, and mutual support became the only things keeping hope alive. A hope that, one day, the world above might learn of their suffering and bring justice. Even in the darkest hours, the children maintained secret dreams. They imagined sunlight on their faces, the warmth of grass under their bare feet, the freedom to laugh and run without fear. These imagined worlds sustained them, giving purpose to their survival and courage to endure another day of chains, hunger, and fear. The Sullivan basement was more than a place of torment. It was a testament to human cruelty, the depths of abuse possible when power goes unchecked. Yet, within its walls, the children demonstrated the strength of spirit, the endurance of hope, and the extraordinary capacity to survive even the most unimaginable horrors. The Sullivans may have controlled their bodies, confined their movements, and crushed their spirits daily, but the children's minds remained alive, silently plotting, dreaming, and enduring. Their plight, though hidden from the world, was profound, a story of suffering, resilience, and the human instinct to survive against all odds. For years, the Sullivan family maintained the illusion of normalcy. From the outside, their estate appeared orderly and respectable, a symbol of wealth and discipline in 1834 Virginia. Yet, as time passed, subtle discrepancies began to stir the curiosity of the villagers. Children who should have been visible in the fields, attending school, or playing in the village streets were conspicuously absent. Mothers whispered to one another, noting the growing void of young voices and footsteps. Fathers exchanged uneasy glances, and a subtle unease began to take hold. The earliest suspicions came from those who served the family. Older maids and hired hands noticed odd routines and strange restrictions. Meals were calculated and portioned, with little regard for the needs of the children. The Sullivans maintained strict rules forbidding anyone from asking questions or investigating certain parts of the estate, particularly the basement. New servants were warned that obedience was not optional, and any deviation could result in punishment or dismissal under circumstances too vague to explain. Despite these warnings, murmurs of oddities persisted. Servants reported faint, muffled cries at night. Some claimed to hear children screaming or sobbing through locked doors, their voices cutting through the otherwise silent mansion. Others noticed shadows moving along basement walls in the dim glow of lanterns. Yet when questioned by the Sullivans, they were dismissed and threatened. Fear kept most people silent, but a seed of suspicion had been planted. The villagers also began to notice patterns beyond the household. There were rarely children visible at the church, even though the Sullivans were devout attendees. The community expected to see the children of one of its wealthiest families participating in local life, yet their absence was palpable. Gossip began to spread. Were the children away at boarding school? Or perhaps they were ill? These explanations satisfied few, as the children's absence grew more pronounced year after year. Some villagers began to connect the Sullivans' secretiveness with the rumors of missing children in surrounding areas. Parents exchanged stories of young servants who had once lived in the household but left abruptly, never speaking of their experiences. Occasional travelers passing near the estate claimed to hear faint cries or the sound of chains clinking in the stillness of the night. These tales, though unverified, fueled the growing unease in the community. The Sullivans, aware of the rising suspicion, doubled down on their public appearances. Jonathan and Margaret hosted lavish gatherings, giving the impression of a happy, well-managed household. They displayed a handful of carefully selected children during church services or public visits, ensuring the illusion that all was well. But for those who looked closely, there was a subtle rigidity to the children's smiles, a haunted look in their eyes, and an unnatural obedience that seemed beyond mere discipline. Some of the braver villagers attempted to investigate. A neighbor once approached the manor under the guise of offering assistance with chores, hoping to catch a glimpse of the children. Another visited to deliver supplies and noticed a faint, unnatural stench near the basement entrance, a mixture of damp earth and something metallic. Each, however, was quickly rebuffed by the Sullivans, whose polite demeanor masked a steely resolve to maintain control and conceal the horrors below. Rumors escalated into fear. Mothers warned their children to stay away from the estate. Village elders exchanged concerns in hushed tones, debating whether the family's wealth and influence allowed them to flout the moral and social norms of the community. The Sullivans' reputation acted as both shield and sword, silencing inquiries while inspiring awe. Many villagers preferred to ignore the signs rather than risk the wrath of one of the region's most powerful families. Yet, even as fear prevented direct confrontation, the community's curiosity continued to grow. Whispers spread, and tales of cruelty became legend, shared at church gatherings or around hearth fires. Children in the village were warned not to stray near the mansion, told stories of iron chains and dark cellars. These tales, though exaggerated in retelling, had a kernel of truth that kept neighbors vigilant and fearful. Eventually, the weight of suspicion became undeniable. Even without direct evidence, the sheer number of children absent, combined with servant testimonies and local anecdotes, made it impossible for the community to ignore the possibility of wrongdoing. It was only a matter of time before someone, brave, desperate, or both, would attempt to uncover the truth hidden within the Sullivan basement. The stage was set. The town's suspicion, nurtured by years of observation, gossip, and unexplained phenomena, began to converge toward a moment of discovery. In their fear, the villagers understood something instinctively. The Sullivans' wealth and status might protect them temporarily, but no secret could remain buried forever, especially one of such magnitude. The children, meanwhile, unaware that the world above had begun to question their absence, continued to endure their hidden torment. They remained chained, hungry, and isolated, Yet hope flickered faintly in their hearts. The villagers' suspicion, though indirect, hinted at a possibility that one day justice, or at least liberation, might arrive. The tension in the community reached a breaking point when a visiting magistrate, prompted by numerous complaints, decided to act. He requested permission to investigate the Sullivan estate more thoroughly. Though the family outwardly agreed, maintaining their facade of cooperation, the children's fate hung in the balance, unknown to all except those who controlled their chains. This period of suspicion marked the beginning of the end for the Sullivan's secret. The community's growing awareness, combined with the courage of a few determined individuals, would ultimately lead to the horrifying revelation of the basement and the chained children within. What had been hidden for years was about to be exposed, shattering the illusion of respectability and revealing the true extent of human cruelty. The town's suspicion, once mere whispers, became a force that could no longer be ignored, a force that would pierce the darkness of the basement and confront the horror that had thrived in secret for decades. The discovery of the Sullivan basement was not the result of a sudden heroic raid or dramatic confrontation. It came slowly, through the combined efforts of suspicious neighbors, concerned townsfolk, and a growing chorus of whispers that could no longer be ignored. For years, the Sullivans had maintained their facade of normalcy, but by 1834, even their wealth and influence could not shield them from the ever-increasing scrutiny. It began with a young servant named Abigail, recently hired to assist Margaret Sullivan. Abigail was timid, soft-spoken, and careful to obey orders, yet her curiosity about the absence of so many children was insatiable. She noticed the hushed warnings from older servants, the chains clinking in distant corners of the basement, and the pall of fear that permeated the lower levels of the estate. One evening, as Jonathan and Margaret dined in the upper rooms, Abigail gathered her courage and descended to the hidden trapdoor in the kitchen. The trapdoor had been carelessly left slightly ajar, perhaps because the patriarch had been distracted or perhaps because the family assumed that no one would dare investigate. Abigail's hands trembled as she lifted the door. A wave of cold, damp air rushed up to meet her, carrying with it the metallic tang of iron and the faint echo of muffled cries. Her heart pounded, yet she pressed forward, descending the narrow staircase into the darkness below. What she saw was a sight that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Chains lined the walls in neat rows, each linked to an iron collar around a child's neck. The children's eyes widened in terror, but the sight of Abigail, a stranger in this hidden world, sparked a fragile hope. Their skin was pale, their hair matted and unkempt, and their thin clothing did little to protect them from the cold stone floor. Some were curled in corners, shivering with hunger or fear, while others clung to one another for comfort. Abigail's first instinct was to scream, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had heard the stories, the punishments for disobedience, the ruthlessness of Jonathan and Margaret. Instead, she quietly whispered reassurances to the children, promising to help them if she could. Then, with a steady hand, she climbed back up the stairs and sought the assistance of neighbors she trusted. The community responded with a mix of disbelief and urgency. At first, many dismissed Abigail's account as the frightened imaginings of a young servant. But her sincerity, combined with years of rumors and the increasingly conspicuous absence of children in public spaces, convinced a small group of neighbors to accompany her back to the estate under the cover of night. This group included a local magistrate, a few farmers, and an older woman whose family had once employed the Sullivans. Each approached the mansion with caution, knowing that the patriarch's reputation for cruelty extended beyond the basement. They entered the house quietly, avoiding detection by Jonathan, who remained in the drawing room with Margaret. With Abigail's guidance, they lifted the trapdoor and descended into the basement. The sight that greeted them was worse than any had imagined. 47 children, chained and malnourished, stared up at them with hollow eyes. The older ones tried to protect the younger, holding them back or whispering warnings to stay quiet. The stench of neglect, sweat, and fear filled the air. Some children had sores from the collars, others bore bruises from whippings or falls, and a few were too weak to stand. The magistrate's stomach turned as he realized the magnitude of the horror hidden beneath the Sullivan estate. Jonathan Sullivan appeared suddenly, having been alerted by the faint sounds of movement. His face twisted with rage and disbelief. He demanded that the intruders leave at once, asserting that the basement and the children were private matters, beyond anyone's authority. Margaret, equally composed, added her threats, claiming that anyone interfering would face legal consequences and the wrath of the family. But the community, now united in outrage and disbelief, would not be intimidated. The magistrate, wielding the authority of the law, insisted on examining the basement and the condition of the children. Witnesses described the chains, the sores, the starvation, and the psychological terror. Each new detail amplified the shock and horror, confirming what had long been suspected but never proven. The children, sensing a possible path to freedom, began to cry out softly. Some begged for help, while others were too scared to move, unsure if this was another cruel trick by their captors. Abigail stayed close, guiding them and offering whispered reassurances. The older children, particularly Thomas, organized the younger ones, helping them understand that these strangers were there to rescue, not punish. Authorities moved swiftly. The children were released from their chains, fed, and given clean clothes. Doctors examined them, documenting the physical and emotional damage. They were soon transported to safer locations, where they would begin the slow process of rehabilitation. Many required months, even years, to recover from the trauma of confinement, neglect, and abuse. Their experiences left permanent scars, yet they also carried with them remarkable resilience and a newfound determination to survive. Jonathan and Margaret Sullivan were arrested and brought to trial. Their public facade crumbled under the weight of evidence, testimony, and the sheer horror of what had occurred beneath their home. The magistrate's report detailed every aspect of the basement: the chains, the malnourished children, and the psychological torment imposed by their parents. The case shocked Virginia and soon spread throughout the country, igniting outrage and prompting a re-examination of child welfare laws in the region. The discovery of the basement did more than rescue 47 children. It revealed the dark potential of unchecked power, the consequences of societal indifference, and the extraordinary courage of those who risked everything to bring the truth to light. It was a pivotal moment in the history of the town, forever changing how the community viewed authority, secrecy, and the welfare of its youngest members. Years later, survivors of the Sullivan basement would recount their experiences, sharing stories of fear, resilience, and the tiny sparks of hope that had sustained them in the darkest hours. Abigail, whose curiosity and bravery had initiated the rescue, became a symbol of courage, showing that even one voice could pierce the silence and lead to salvation. The basement, once a place of unimaginable suffering, became a historical cautionary tale. Its walls, once echoing with cries, now stood as a reminder of the horrors that can exist behind the facade of respectability, and of the human spirit's remarkable ability to endure, survive, and ultimately triumph over cruelty. The revelation of the Sullivan basement sent shockwaves through the town and beyond. Newspapers in nearby cities ran horrified accounts, describing 47 children chained in a dark, damp cellar, malnourished and traumatized. The story quickly became a sensation, stirring outrage among citizens, clergy, and lawmakers alike. The Sullivans, once pillars of the community, were now viewed as monsters hiding behind wealth and respectability. Legal authorities acted swiftly. Jonathan and Margaret Sullivan were arrested and charged with extreme child abuse, false imprisonment, and neglect. The trial drew large crowds. The courtrooms were packed with townspeople eager to witness justice. Witnesses, including Abigail and other former servants, testified about the conditions in the basement, the constant beatings, the hunger, and the cruelty inflicted upon the children. Doctors and caregivers presented detailed reports on the children's physical and psychological state, shocking even seasoned officials. Public sentiment was overwhelming. Families in the region felt both horror and guilt, realizing that the children's suffering had continued unchecked for years, despite being in plain sight. The Sullivans' wealth and status had allowed them to manipulate perception, but even that shield could not withstand the weight of truth. Editorials called for stricter oversight of households, better protection for children, and severe punishment for those who inflicted harm. The community grappled with feelings of betrayal, anger, and sorrow, reflecting on how easily appearances could mask horror. The court proceedings were tense and emotional. The Sullivans attempted to maintain composure, insisting that the children were properly disciplined and that rumors of abuse were exaggerated or fabricated. But their calm demeanor did little to convince the jury or the public. The evidence was overwhelming. The chained children, medical reports, servant testimonies, and corroborating accounts from villagers created a narrative impossible to deny. The Sullivans' arguments fell flat in the face of such undeniable proof. Sentencing reflected the gravity of their crimes. Jonathan Sullivan received the harshest penalties, facing decades in prison for his role in the abuse and imprisonment. Margaret Sullivan, though less physically violent, was sentenced to long-term imprisonment for her complicity and psychological torment of the children. Their fall from grace was complete. The pillars of respectability they had once relied upon were stripped away entirely, leaving only shame, punishment, and infamy. Beyond the legal consequences, the social response was profound. The town organized relief efforts for the rescued children, providing food, clothing, and shelter. Churches held special services to offer spiritual comfort, and families within the community opened their homes to care for the most vulnerable. The ordeal fostered a sense of collective responsibility, with villagers recognizing the importance of vigilance and community involvement in protecting the innocent. The Sullivan case also prompted broader discussions about child welfare. Legislators and social reformers began advocating for stricter oversight of households, enforcement of child protection laws, and educational reforms to ensure that children were not hidden away or neglected. The tragedy of the 47 children became a catalyst for societal change, highlighting the urgent need for mechanisms to prevent such abuses from happening again. Psychological and medical professionals studied the children, documenting the long-term effects of prolonged confinement, abuse, and deprivation. Reports highlighted physical malnutrition, stunted growth, and severe emotional trauma. Yet, alongside the documentation of suffering, there were also accounts of resilience. Despite years of torment, the children demonstrated remarkable adaptability, courage, and determination to survive. These stories inspired compassion and reinforced the urgency of reform. In the end, the legal and social response to the Sullivan case was a turning point. The combination of justice served, community action, and reform advocacy created a framework for protecting vulnerable children in the future. It also served as a stark warning. Appearances could be deceiving, and cruelty could hide behind wealth and power. But the truth, once revealed, demanded accountability. The legacy of the case remained etched in the town's collective memory. Parents warned their children, neighbors stayed vigilant, and historians later recounted the events as a dark chapter in Virginia's history. The Sullivans' actions were condemned universally, but the resilience of the children offered a glimmer of hope, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and survive even the darkest circumstances. After their rescue, the 47 children of the Sullivan estate faced the monumental task of recovery. Freed from chains and the oppressive darkness of the basement, they stepped into a world that was overwhelming, unfamiliar, and at times frightening. The simplest things, sunlight, open spaces, fresh air, and human touch, were sensations they had almost forgotten, and each moment required adjustment. Medical teams assessed the children immediately. Many were severely malnourished, with stunted growth, bruises, and sores that had been left untreated for years. Some suffered from untreated illnesses, while others bore the psychological scars of prolonged confinement. Severe anxiety, withdrawal, and difficulty speaking or making eye contact. Doctors and caregivers worked tirelessly, providing nourishment, clothing, and gentle guidance to help them regain strength and basic bodily health. The children's emotional recovery proved even more complex. Some struggled to trust the adults who now cared for them, fearing punishment or betrayal. Nightmares were frequent, and panic would strike at the slightest sound, recalling the endless fear of the basement. Older children, like Thomas, assumed responsibility for their younger siblings, offering comfort, reassurance, and even gentle discipline to help them adjust. These bonds, forged in the basement, became essential to their healing. Psychologists and clergy provided counseling and emotional support. They encouraged storytelling, play, and expression of feelings, tools previously denied to the children. Gradually, the children began to speak of the horrors they had endured, allowing caregivers to understand the depth of trauma and design individualized recovery plans. Art, song, and writing became avenues for self-expression, helping them reclaim identities that had been suppressed for so long. Efforts were also made to reunite children with surviving extended family members or place them in caring foster homes. Some adapted quickly to these new environments, while others required months, even years, to feel safe and secure. The community rallied around them, offering resources, mentorship, and a sense of belonging that the Sullivans had denied them. Despite the lingering trauma, the children displayed remarkable resilience. Many demonstrated intelligence, creativity, and leadership, skills honed in the harsh environment of the basement. They slowly began to envision a future beyond survival, embracing education, friendship, and the possibility of freedom. The recovery process was painstaking, but it also revealed the extraordinary strength of the human spirit to endure even the most unimaginable suffering. The story of their recovery became a symbol of hope. While the Sullivan estate represented the depths of cruelty, the children's journey into safety and healing exemplified courage, resilience, and the capacity of communities to protect and nurture the vulnerable. The Sullivan case left an indelible mark on Virginia and the nation. The story of 47 children chained in a basement shocked the public, revealing the horrifying extent to which cruelty could thrive behind closed doors. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that appearances of respectability and wealth could conceal unspeakable horrors. The estate itself, once a symbol of affluence, became infamous, remembered more for the suffering it concealed than the grandeur it displayed. Legally, the case prompted significant change. Authorities and lawmakers recognized the failures that had allowed such abuse to persist for years. New regulations and oversight measures were introduced to ensure that children in households, particularly those of servants or less privileged status, would not be neglected or hidden from public scrutiny. The trial of Jonathan and Margaret Sullivan became a reference point for child protection laws, illustrating the necessity of vigilance, legal accountability, and societal responsibility. Socially, the Sullivan case stirred the community into action. It ignited discussions on moral duty, compassion, and the responsibility of neighbors and officials to protect vulnerable individuals. Parents became more vigilant, neighbors more watchful, and the community as a whole developed a deeper understanding of the hidden dangers that could exist even within seemingly ordinary households. The story emphasized that silence and fear could enable abuse to flourish, while courage and intervention could save lives. For the children, the legacy was personal and enduring. Though physically freed, many carried the psychological scars of their ordeal for life. Yet, their survival became a testament to resilience, determination, and the human spirit. Some went on to advocate for child welfare, education, and reform, sharing their experiences to prevent similar tragedies. Their voices, once silenced in the basement, became instruments of change, ensuring that future generations would benefit from awareness and protection. Historians and storytellers preserved the Sullivan case in local lore, emphasizing both the horror and the eventual triumph of justice. The estate, the basement, and the children's suffering became symbols of the need for vigilance and compassion. Over time, the story transcended its historical context, serving as a moral lesson that cruelty may hide in plain sight, but courage, community, and resilience can confront even the darkest evil. Ultimately, the Sullivan case represents a dual legacy. On one hand, it exposes the depths of human cruelty and the dangers of unchecked power. On the other, it celebrates survival, courage, and the transformative impact of truth and justice. The memory of those 47 children chained in a basement remains a powerful reminder that even in the bleakest circumstances, hope and humanity can prevail. 5.